When Samuel Fix died, only a handful of people were notified. For years, Fix had been a controversial figure in the world of academia. His critics said that his studies into the occult went too far. This ended up costing him more than one job, his wife, his family, and eventually, his reputation. When Fix died, only a few people were notified because there were only a few people who cared. The lawyer gave each of them an identical letter. Inside the sealed envelope was an address, directions, and a specified time and date. The following day, on Christmas Eve, at a cabin in the foothills just outside of town, on the edge of an old forest. The following day, these 4 people drove out to that address, where they found a cozy log cabin that was old but well-tended. It had been prepared for them, lit up for the holidays, and toasty warm inside. Although sparsely furnished, the cabin had been fully decked out for Christmas. There were lights and garland hung merrily, sprigs of mistletoe in the doorways, and a big, bushy Christmas tree in the front room, full to bursting with glass ornaments and tinsel. Under the tree sat 4 odd-looking boxes that had been neatly wrapped, adorned with bows, and labeled with their names. 1 gift each from their old occult mentor Samuel Fix, waiting to be opened. Miranda, dressed in black, picked up her gift, shook it, and said, "Well, let's begin, shall we?" Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem. Killers, cannibals, and cults. Fearful fiction and furious fact. Tall tales and terrifying truths. This is a scary home companion. Although these 4 mourners could not be described as friends, they had nonetheless become very close to one another over the last 3 years. They had been working together on research projects and spent time as a group under the guidance of Sam Fix. He was their mentor in the occult. Miranda had studied under him the longest. She was the only member of the group wearing the respectful black. Leon was the most recent devotee. He had grand designs on using the research for a series of fictional horror novels. Kevin had dropped out of college to study under Fix full-time, and Beezy, a middle-aged woman and former professor herself, had left her job at the behest of her mentor. Over the years, Fix had taught many students, but these 4, they were something more than that. They were acolytes. Which made it all the more confusing to them why they were here in a place they didn't know existed, looking at gifts that made them feel uneasy. "Why didn't the lawyer give them to us?" Beezy asked. She shook her gift and felt that it was dense and very heavy. Miranda answered, "The will needs to be executed a particular way. We need to do what Sam wanted." Kevin always sort of did his own thing, halfway tuned out of his surroundings, and now was no different. He grabbed his box, he shredded the wrapping paper, and tore it open. Inside, he found a cutlass. Well, 3/4 of a cutlass, anyway. The handle and the base of the blade had been snapped off. Kevin turned it over in his hands, studying it. It was old, maybe a few decades, but he saw no markings on it. Okay, he said with a shrug. Leon opened his box and found the head of a pitchfork. Inside Beezy's gift was a gladius, thick and heavy and older than the cabin or any of the trees around it. She picked it up and waved it around. It had a comforting heft. Miranda went last and opened the smallest of the 4 packages. Inside was the curved, wide blade of a flensing knife. Okay, Kevin said again for emphasis. And this was worth coming out here today. Why? Come on. There has to be something else, right? Beezy asked. Look. Leon pointed at the tree. Nestled in the branches, half covered in tinsel, was another creamy white envelope, the same as the other 4. Leon took it down and opened it. He read it out loud and then passed it around for everyone to see with their own eyes. It read, "This is the end of our studies together, but not the end of our journey. These gifts are for you to give back to me. Help me. Together, we shall prove once and for all that our beliefs are real. Join me in the basement. In good faith, Sam." They sat in silence for a moment. Beezy nervously said, "So this is the part of the movie where we all just leave, right?" Kevin stood up and started looking around the room for other messages. "I always felt that the old man was holding back on us. Didn't you? I thought there was something more that he wasn't saying." Leon nodded in agreement and started to search the rest of the cabin. Miranda reread the note and shook her head. "This feels important. We have to do what he wants." Leon called out that he had found a door leading downstairs. "Are you coming?" Miranda asked. "You better fucking believe it," Beezy laughed. She was still nervous, but way too curious to walk away now. Following Leon's lead and each carrying their gift, the foursome went down a wooden stairwell into a dimly lit workroom basement. There were steel workbenches, an arc welder, neat rows of tools on a massive pegboard. It was cold. It was quiet. It was empty. Except for something that was hanging from the ceiling in chains, covered under a heavy tarp. The way that shape hung there limply, it looked like a human body, only slightly too large. Kevin crossed the room, grabbed the edge of the tarp, and yanked it free. It wasn't a body. It was a jagged man. They gasped. They gawked. They genuflected. But they didn't speak. They all knew what it was. They were intimately acquainted with the lore of the Jagged Man. It had been one of Sam's passions over the last few years. One might have even said his obsession. And yet, for all the hours and days and weeks and months of research they had done together, Sam had never mentioned this to them, never mentioned that he was building a Jagged Man of his own. The sinister sculpture was made entirely of knives and blades and other cutting implements, spot welded together over a framework of rebar and bound into place with knots and clumps and strands of barbed wire that worked as muscle and sinew. The torso looked like a bird's cage, vertical bars made of swords and scimitars, and inside, like a perch, a meat hook swung ever so slightly. The feet were made of little beds of twisted, rusty nails, packed tightly with shards of broken glass. Oh my God, he really did it. Beezy moved forward and ran her hand along the dull side of a machete femur. Kevin found a light switch in the corner, but it didn't light up the room. Instead, it triggered a small TV in the corner, as well as the attached VCR. The burst of static pulled everyone's attention away from the Jagged Man and to the image of Sam Fix sitting behind the desk in his office. He smiled at them. My friends, I hope you all could make it here today. It is important to me. If we all give a little, no one has to give too much. This is my final goodbye to you all, and one last favor to ask of you. You see before you now my masterwork, my own Jagged Man. I dare say no one besides the few of us has such a depth of knowledge about the Jagged Man. We were all his students. It is believed that the Jagged Man is an entity that is summoned to inhabit a vessel. I believe there is more. Taking my own life is the next step for me, one I cannot return from unless you are willing to do what must be done. I don't wish to summon a Jagged Man. I wish to become one. As this old body of mine fails, I see a chance to move into a new one, a stronger one, an eternal one. The blades that I gave to you are the last pieces to the puzzle. Find where yours goes and put it into place. You must remember, of course, that every blade in a Jagged Man must be blooded. I need you to let him taste your blood. One by one, the foursome cut their hands with their gifted blades and found the open spot waiting to receive them. It wasn't hard. The blades actually seemed drawn to the Jagged Man, pulling themselves home. Miranda went last, slipping that flensing knife into the base of the torso. Kevin unpaused the videotape, and the professor kept talking. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. It's important to me that you give freely of yourselves. You are my flock, and I love you all very dearly. The next step is harder. Under one of the work tables, you will find a cooler the executor of my will should have seen to its delivery. Please open it. You know the story. You know how it goes. I was the hands. Now the jagged man needs the rest. You know what to do. Leon found a large cooler and dragged it to the foot of the jagged man. They all crowded around as he opened it. The dry ice smoke cleared out and revealed 2 containers. One holding the heart of Sam Fix. The other, his eyes. "This is for real," Kevin whispered. He started pacing the room, trying to sort his feelings out. "This is really, really for real." "Okay, I don't know," Beezy said. She sat on the steps, taking deep breaths. That's Sam in the cooler. I don't know that I can do this." Miranda withdrew the containers and placed them on a workbench. The legend of the Jagged Man comes not from modern Christianity, but from Christian mythology, a wellspring of stories and beliefs long forgotten by most of the world. It started with the War of the Rebel Angels. God disappeared from his throne for 7 days, at which time 1/3 of the heavenly host rose up in revolt. God returned. He had been down below, in a place under the natural world, one that he had created as a punishment for these disloyal angels. God cast the rebels out of heaven, twisting their bodies and changing them from beatific host to abhorrent maleficia. Now trapped in hell, the rebel angels battled each other for supremacy. They fought a war that raged for weeks. It soaked the ground with unholy blood and left behind a mountain of corpses and broken weapons. In the darkness of that mountain, a new evil arose. A jagged man, pulling itself together from the blooded blades and spilled gore of the maleficia. His legend became eternal. Every time a blade draws blood, the jagged man drinks. If you collect enough blooded blades, you could build a body for him. Dozens of people had tried over the years, but they did so from worship or from fear. Sam Fix wanted something else entirely. He wanted to live on inside a jagged man. Making the sculpture of blades was the first part, but to finish the summoning, it needed fresh, sacrificial parts. Eyes with which to see, and a heart blade of the jagged man's skull was made with a grid of serrated steak knives. Inside what appeared to be eye sockets hung 2 fish hooks. Kevin was the tallest of the group, and even he had to get on his tippy toes just to reach. He held one of Sam Fix's eyeballs in his hand. Felt like a slippery, squishy little wad of goo. He stabbed the back of it onto the hook, and then repeated the process with the other eye. When Kevin stepped back, the jagged man was looking at him. Miranda unwrapped the heart and handed it to Kevin. He nicked his wrist on a rib as he reached inside the torso. He had to really drive that lump of muscle down onto the dull hook. And then something happened. Not a bolt of lightning or a poof of magic dust, just a shiver of unnatural cold passing through them. And then the soft clicking and scraping of blades as they tried to move. The jagged man trembled on the end of his chains. The eyes turned in their makeshift sockets, looking at each of the four in turn. The heart, empty of blood, rose and fell on its hook. Beezy vomited. Leon held onto the wall to keep steady. Miranda fell to her knees. "Is that you, darling?" she asked. "It can't move," Kevin said to himself. "There has to be more. We haven't done enough." He left a red smear on the front of the VCR when he unpaused the tape. Sam Fix continued. "This last step, it'll be the hardest, I'm afraid. It's the reason that I needed all of you to be here. Like the Tin Man needed oil for his joints, so does the Jagged Man require his own special lubricant. In order to move, he needs to be smeared in blood, fresh, hot blood. With 4 of you here, it will only take a pint from each of you. No one needs to be hurt, but we all must work together. I trust I can count on you. Thank you, my friends." The tape went to static, and Miranda went to the Jagged Man. She touched him, slicing open her hands, dripping the blood on the slowly beating heart within. The eyes stared at her. "You heard him," she said to the room. "We all have to bleed for him." Kevin stripped away his shirt and stood next to Miranda. He ran the side of his wrist along the side of the Jagged Man's wrist, slicing it wide open. Blood drizzled down the elbow, slowly running towards the sharp fingers. Kevin stepped back as the Jagged Man bent its arm and flexed its hand. "It works," he said. He pumped his fist in the air. "It fucking works!" "Now you," Miranda said to Leon and Beezy. They were both crouched at the base of the steps, clinging on to one another, unsure of what to do next. "Help us," Kevin told them. He knelt down to drip blood on one of the legs. "This isn't enough. We need more blood." "Please," Miranda pleaded with them. "It's your last chance." "No." Leon shook his head. "No, I just can't." "Absolutely fucking not," Beezy hissed. "Get me out of here." Miranda looked at the Jagged Man in the eyes, and then pulled that flensing knife out of its waist. "I'm sorry, darling. We tried to do it your way. Now, I have to do it my way." She crossed the room in 2 steps and stabbed Leon in the side of the neck. Blood geysered, frothy, staining the cement wall, splashing across Beezy, who shrieked. "You're wasting it," Kevin snarled. Miranda pulled the knife free. No, Beezy wept. "I'm sorry, Beezy," Miranda said. "Sam really liked you. You should have given a little, and I wouldn't have had to take so much." She sliced down the front of Beezy's face until the tip of the curved blade caught on the edge of her eyelid, and then Miranda pushed her full body weight forward and slid the blade into Beezy's brain. She whipped around and pointed the blade at Kevin. But Kevin wasn't even looking at her. He was dragging the still twitching carcass of Leon towards the Jagged Man before all that precious blood got wasted in the dust. Kevin didn't care about Leon or Beezy. He was in the presence of greatness, and he needed to see it through. "Was it you that got his heart?" he asked Miranda. She lowered her knife. "Yes. He made me the executor of his will a few months ago. I helped set all of this up for him. We did it his way. He didn't want anyone to die." Kevin shrugged. "Too sentimental. The last time I saw him, he told me to watch your back because you were watching his." "Thank you, Kevin. This should give us more than enough blood to finish." The Jagged Man waved its arm, raising it high as they worked to splash every last inch of it with blood. Kevin smashed Leon's face into the ribcage, yanking it back and forth into a gushy mush, and then started to rub that mush all over the Jagged Man's legs. Miranda caught gouts and rivulets of Beezy's blood in the cooler, and then used her shredded hands like paintbrushes to smear it on thick. When they were finished, the Jagged Man was freshly coated, head to toe. It reached overhead, grabbing the chains, pulling itself up and free. It dropped to the floor, over 400 pounds of killing steel on feet of broken glass. It looked down on them with Samuel's eyes. With one hand, it beckoned Kevin, "Come forward." With a squealing gesture, the bent fillet knife it called an index finger twisting. Kevin shuffled forward. The Jagged Man bent to one knee. It rubbed the broken tips of its finger blades together, and then swiftly reached up, punching through Kevin's underbelly just below the belt, sinking up to the wrist and further, burrowing its way through the pulsing treasures of his ribcage. The Jagged Man stood, raising the impaled acolyte with it. It kept reaching up and through the shrieking, spasming man until those finger blades poked out through the base of Kevin's throat and hooked under his jawbone. The Jagged Man waved his arm, making Kevin dance like a puppet with dangly, jangly arms and legs. Miranda pulled away to the far corner of the room, watching on as the Jagged Man tired of his new toy and wrenched his arm free. Not the way it had gone in, of course. What fun would that be? The bladed man pulled up and out, snapping the sternum and the collarbones and opening Kevin up from stem to stern, and then some. Blood spattered the room explosively, and guts decked the walls. "Sam?" Miranda called out. "Sam, darling. Is that you?" The jagged man stood in front of her. The motion of its neck, which was made of rebar and razor wire and bayonets, was very limited. But still the jagged man managed to turn its head to the left and then the right, as if to say, "No." The jagged man pulled Miranda close and gave her a big, appreciative hug, embracing her with razored forearms and unyielding saw-blade wrists, cutting through her flesh, snapping bone, opening her up, while slashing her apart slowly, until she fell to pieces, quite literally, on the floor around his feet. The jagged man stood tall, every inch glistening wet, feeling limber and loose, and dripping with red like a fresh Christmas goose. The jagged man bent his elbows and flexed his knees and started to dance his merry jig. Ding, ding, dong, ding, ding, dong, ding, ding, dong, ding, ding, dong, ding, ding, bells, sweet little bells, all sing the same, throw cares away, Christmas is here, bringing a chick, too young and old, pink in the bowl, all kind of bells, sweet little bells, all sing the same, throw cares away, Christmas is here, bringing a chick, too young and old, pink in the bowl, all kind of bells, sweet little bells, all sing the same, throw cares away, Christmas is here, bringing a chick. Happy holidays! And thank you for listening to what we are calling the new Christmas episode of A Scary Home Companion. If you want to learn more about the Jagged Man, look up the classic episode, His Feet Were Made of Broken Glass. And if you would like a more traditional Christmas story, the kind with Santa and reindeer and goblins and chainsaws, check out Christmas Stories for Weird Kids. Find the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or email us directly at ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com. Better yet, you could sign up for the Scary Home Companion Patreon. You get bonus episodes, extra content, and resources to explore the world of the show. Would you like an example? The newest Patreon exclusive episode is now available. It continues a Patreon exclusive story arc that has touched several episodes. How will lounge singer extraordinaire Swingin' Sonny Champagne escape the clutches of a cartel blood cult devoted to the flayed Lord? Find out only on Patreon. This episode was produced and edited by Jeff Davidson and featured the music Sing We Now of Christmas by Seth Partridge, I Will Come Home for Christmas by Junior 85, What Child Is This by Podington Bear, and Carol of the Hell's Bells, as well as the theme music by Chelsae Oxendine. Oh,